For over a decade, we watched Tony Stark's entire journey. We saw him build that first suit of armor, create the Avengers, and save the whole universe. We thought we understood his legacy, but what if all of that was just setting the stage for his single most important project? A project that wasn't built with iron and circuits, but with heart and potential. Today, we're going to break down how Tony Stark's faith in a 15-year-old kid from Queens was actually a long-term plan, a decade in the making, and how that plan is about to lead to a final test that could define the future of the entire multiverse.
It's a bold statement, right? I get it. How can a person be a creation? But really think about it for a second. Tony didn't just recruit Peter. He was actively molding him, testing him, preparing him for what was to come. This was never just some casual mentorship. For a guy like Tony, who was haunted by his own bad creations like Ultron, Peter was a chance at redemption. He saw a potential successor, sure, but more than that, he saw a better version of himself, and he invested everything, his time, his tech, and in the end, his own life, to make that potential a reality. This was Tony Stark's final, and maybe his greatest project, and we're about to see the final product unleashed. So to really get this, we have to trace the whole journey from the very beginning. We're going to start where it all kicked off, Civil War, with Tony finding a kid in a homemade onesie. From there, we'll jump into Homecoming for maybe the single most important lesson Tony ever taught him. Then we'll get into the heavy stuff, watching their bond peak and then tragically shatter in Infinity War and Endgame. After that, we'll break down how No Way Home stripped Peter of absolutely everything to forge him into the hero he was always meant to be. And finally, we'll look ahead to the ultimate test, Secret Wars, where this decade-long story might just find its epic conclusion. Okay, so let's rewind the clock to 2016. The Avengers are completely broken. After the unbelievable destruction caused by Ultron, an AI that Tony himself created, the world's governments are demanding oversight. The Sokovia Accords are on the table, and they split the team right down the middle. You've got Captain America on one side, believing heroes need to stay independent. And on the other, you have Tony Stark, who's just crippled by guilt and convinced they need to be put in check. The whole super team idea, his grand experiment, is falling apart. He's about to go head-to-head with Cap, and he needs an ace up his sleeve. So who does he pick?
Think about how audacious this decision is. At this point, Tony Stark can call on a world of enhanced individuals, seasoned soldiers, anyone. Instead, he flies to this little apartment in Queens to recruit a high school sophomore who's been stopping bike thieves. His own team doesn't get it. Natasha is skeptical. Steve Rogers is absolutely horrified that he'd bring a child into their conflict. But Tony saw something more than just powers. He saw this pure, unfiltered sense of responsibility without any of the ego that had corrupted his own past. He saw a genius intellect that could actually rival his own. In Peter Parker, Tony saw a chance at a real legacy. Not another weapon, not another AI, but a person. A hero that he wished he could have been at that age. So during that iconic airport battle, Peter is holding his own against these veterans. He even manages to impress the man he's supposed to be fighting, Captain America. And it's Steve, Tony's ideological opposite, who actually says out loud what Tony already knew. He says, "You got heart, kid." That one line is the first major validation of Tony's huge gamble. It wasn't about the super strength or the web shooters. Steve had seen plenty of that. It was about Peter's character, his unwavering determination. Even in the middle of a fight, Tony's greatest rival couldn't help but see that special quality that made Peter Parker a true hero. All right, let's jump ahead to Spider-Man Homecoming. So after the incredible high of fighting with the Avengers, Peter's back in Queens and he is just desperate to prove himself and get back to the big leagues. In his eagerness, he goes after the Vulture, completely disobeys Tony's direct orders, and nearly causes a ferry to split in half, endangering hundreds of innocent lives. And this catastrophic mistake leads to the most critical lesson of Peter's entire life. This is the ultimate tough love moment. Peter pleads with him. He says that famous line, "I'm nothing without this suit." And that right there, that was a massive red flag for Tony. Peter had started to believe his worth as a hero came from Tony's tech, the AI, the fancy web shooters, the instant kill mode. He was basically becoming a sidekick who was totally dependent on a gadget. And Tony, who had spent years grappling with his own dependency on the Iron Man suit, especially back in Iron Man 3, knew he had to stop this cycle before it even started. He saw Peter making the exact same mistake that had almost broken him. You guys, this single sentence becomes the narrative anchor for Peter's entire journey in the MCU. Tony isn't just taking away some tech, he's challenging Peter's very identity. He's forcing him to answer a fundamental question, the same one Tony had to answer for himself in a cave with a box of scraps. Are you a hero because of the suit, or does the suit just happen to belong to a hero?
It's a brutal, painful lesson, but it's probably the most important piece of wisdom Tony could ever pass on. And what happens? Peter proves the lesson was learned. He puts his homemade hoodie and goggles back on. No AI, no advanced surveillance, just his wits, his strength, and his heart. And he takes down the vulture. He proves to Tony, and way more importantly, he proves to himself that the hero was always the kid underneath the mask. So when Tony later offers him a brand new suit and a spot on the Avengers, what does he do? He turns it down. He chooses to stay the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man because he finally understood he wasn't ready yet. That quiet maturity, that was the ultimate proof that Tony's investment was really paying off. Okay, so now we're gonna fast forward to the highest possible stakes. We're talking Infinity War and Endgame. This is where their relationship completely transforms from mentor and student to fellow warriors facing the end of the universe side by side. And it's where their bond is both solidified and tragically, permanently broken. Remember back in Homecoming when Peter turned down the Avengers spot? That was a formal offer. There was a whole press conference waiting. This is totally different. They're on a spaceship heading towards a battle they might not even survive. And Peter proves he's finally ready. He stowed away to help, showing a kind of courage that went beyond just following orders. So Tony knights him. All right, kid, you're an Avenger now. It's not a press conference. It's a battlefield promotion. Peter didn't get the title when it was offered to him like some prize. He earned it when it actually mattered. And then the snap. It's just one of the most devastating, brutal moments in the entire MCU. Peter, who's still just a kid, is absolutely terrified. He clings to his mentor, his father figure, and literally fades away in his arms. And that moment completely shattered Tony Stark. It was his ultimate failure. For 5 long years, he lived with this crushing guilt of recruiting this kid only to watch him die. Bringing Peter back became his singular obsession, the one thing that could make him risk the family and the peace that he had finally found. It was his failure to protect Peter that drove him to even attempt the time heist. The symmetry of it all is just heartbreaking. They get to fight side by side one last time, but the roles are completely reversed. Now it's Tony who makes the ultimate sacrifice, and it's Peter who has to watch his mentor die. As Tony's life is fading, Peter, full of hope, just tries to reassure him, we won. He lost the man who saw his potential, the man who believed in him from the start, the man who literally died to bring him back. And at this moment, Peter is well and truly alone. So this brings us to No Way Home, where it feels like the universe is determined to strip away every single last piece of Tony's influence from Peter. Without his mentor, without the Avengers, Peter has no safety net. He is forced to finally, completely stand on his own 2 feet. The totality of this loss is just staggering. First, his secret identity is revealed to the world, destroying his personal life. Then, to save the entire multiverse from falling apart, he makes the ultimate sacrifice. He has Doctor Strange cast a spell that makes everyone, everywhere, forget that Peter Parker ever existed. He loses MJ, he loses Ned, he loses Happy Hogan, who was his last living connection to Tony. He loses all the Stark tech, the support system, literally everything. He is functionally erased from existence. And this is it. This is the final step in his maturation. By losing everything, Peter is forced to live out Tony's lesson from Homecoming in the most extreme way you can possibly imagine. He truly has nothing but himself. He's back in a tiny apartment, sewing his own suit, listening to a police scanner. He is no longer Iron Man Jr. or Tony Stark's mentee. He is simply Peter Parker, the hero. He is finally strong enough to be Spider-Man without any of the trappings, finally fulfilling the potential Tony saw in him all those years ago. So Peter has become the self-sufficient hero that Tony always knew he could be. And the story could end right there. It would be a perfect arc. But we believe the MCU has one last devastating test for him, a final exam that's going to push him beyond anything he has ever faced. And it involves the return of a very, very familiar face. Okay, now just let this sink in for a minute. Upcoming Secret Wars event, Robert Downey Jr. will return, but not as a heroic variant of Tony Stark. No, he'll be returning as the prime villain of the entire multiverse saga, Doctor Doom. Forget super soldiers or aliens. The psychological warfare of this potential twist is just unimaginable. It would weaponize Peter's greatest love and his deepest grief against him. So this poses the ultimate question, doesn't it? Peter has mourned Tony for years. He's built his entire heroic identity on the lessons that Tony taught him. If this theory actually holds true, he will have to stand across the battlefield from a monster who is wearing the face of the man he loved like a father. Can he throw a punch at that face? Can he possibly stop a villain who looks and sounds exactly like his dead mentor? You know, the craziest thing is, the answer comes from Tony himself. He always believed that Peter's heart, his inherent goodness, would make him the greatest of them all. This final battle wouldn't be about strength, it would be about character. It would be the ultimate test of Peter's resolve, forcing him to become the hero Tony always knew he could be, even if that means fighting his mentor's ghost to do it. And this is where it all comes together. Every single lesson Tony taught Peter was, without him ever knowing it, preparation for this exact moment. Be your own hero. Don't rely on the tech. Trust yourself. Do what's right, even when it's the hardest thing you could possibly do. He would have to use every bit of wisdom Tony imparted to him to defeat the very image of the man who gave it to him.
Ultimately, Peter Parker proving Tony Stark right is the true emotional core of this entire multiverse saga. It's not just about cosmic stakes and clashing timelines. No, it's about a decade-long story of a kid from Queens living up to the faith that a genius placed in him. It would be the final chapter in Tony's story, told through the actions of his greatest creation.
And that leaves us with a final thought. We always think of Tony's legacy as being the Iron Man armor or the arc reactor, or founding the Avengers. But what if all of that was secondary? What if his single greatest contribution to the universe was seeing the heart in a kid that nobody knew and betting everything he had on him? Because in the end, it won't be a suit of armor that saves the multiverse. It will be the hero that Tony Stark helped build.